to second it for him. Madam Speaker, this motion is important, and it addresses an issue that has been around for quite some time. I haven't been a member of this Legislative Assembly for as long as my colleague from Savannah, but I'm here, I've been here long enough to remember this issue coming up in the previous administration. And with your permission, I'd like to read from a CNS article that was published on the 26th of October 2016, titled, "Tibbetts Commits to Dealing with Beach Access." And I won't read the whole article, Madam Speaker, but the piece that I think is important. It says, Tibbetts told the Parliament that the Chief Surveyor in his ministry was in the process of completing a report on beach access and rights of way across all 3 islands, and he expected that to be completed soon. He also accepted that the various laws needed to be reviewed to enable government to intervene to protect access. The minister revealed that a public land use bill was currently out for stakeholders' comment, which he hoped to bring to the LA in January. The legislation, he said, would deal with the broader issues of management and use of all public land, including beach access and rights of way. But there were several other laws that needed to be amended. Tibbetts said the goal was to deal with the wider legislation to be fair to all concerned and preserve the access rights. He accepted that the problems with the current legislation prevent government from acting. And although the public has a right to mount a legal challenge where beach access is denied, few people can afford to take cases to court. Pointing to the historic Cayman land ownership, he said locals never denied people access or rights of way on land, but as it had been bought and sold, people have come with a different mindset. He added that some people believe they can prevent others from walking on the beach, and that has been compounded by the commercial development along 7 Mile Beach. Madam Speaker, that article, and I remember I was in this Honorable House when the minister made those comments not too long ago. But going a bit further back, Madam Speaker, there was a private member's motion, number 9 of 96, titled Beach Access and Use by the Public, brought by former ministers Roy Bodden and Gilbert McLean. The resolved section of that motion said, be it resolved that the government make a clear and unequivocal statement regarding access to and use of beaches by the public. Madam Speaker, there was another motion after that, private member motion number 2 of 2000, titled Public Access to North Sound and 7 Mile Beach. That was brought by John D. Jefferson and W. McKeever Bush. The resolved section of that motion, Madam Speaker, reads, be it therefore resolved that government now consider taking the appropriate action by whatever means necessary to ensure that Caymanian boat owners and other members of the general public continue to have access to the North Sound and 7 Mile Beach area through established access roads that have been used for this purpose for so many years. So, Madam Speaker, this issue has been with us for quite some time, and it existed quite a bit of time before those motions were brought. I was going to read from the Hansards of those two motions, Madam Speaker, but because we're running late and time is limited, I won't go into great detail on those. However, I will note that from the debates on the private member's motion number 9 of 96, one thing that stood out from the debate given by former Minister Gilbert McLean is that he acknowledged that And I'll read that short section, Madam Speaker. Obviously, we are reaching a point where there are persons who will challenge the rights of Caymanians and other people visiting the country to use the beach, or else there would not have been the need for the police to remind beach owners and the public what is prescribed under the prescription law. I must say that I am very pleased to see the quick response of the police. I think there was about 3 occasions when the police made the statement and made it again because of this particular matter of beach use. Madam Speaker, that motion was calling for government to make a clear and unequivocal statement. And when Mr. Honorable Ivor Archie gave his contribution to that debate, he made it quite clear what the legal position was. He said, notwithstanding the fact that the boundaries of private land may include the part of the beach above the high water mark, the public under the prescription law can acquire right to use that part of the beach for fishing, purposes incidental thereto, for bathing and for recreation, once it has enjoyed the uninterrupted use for a period of 20 years. Once this right is acquired, it is indefeasible. In other words, a subsequent purchaser of the land will take title to the land, subject to the right of the public to use as aforesaid. Similarly, the public by long use can acquire a prescriptive right of access to the beach over a road, track, or pathway which passes over any adjacent or adjoining land. Madam Speaker, if anyone seeks to, and I'm continuing to quote, if anyone seeks to dispute that right or any dispute arises in relation to a particular parcel of land, what the prescription law provides is that any person concerned in such a dispute can take the matter to the Grand Court for a final definitive determination. Madam Speaker, that statement clarified what the legal position was with regard to the prescription law, which persists to this day. This prescription law has been used in this country for a great many years, Madam Speaker. And it is historically significant because it makes very clear from our humble beginnings what rights we wanted preserved for our people when it came to rights of way and access to the beach. Private Member's Motion number 2 of 2000 only served to strengthen that resolve, Madam Speaker. Both of those motions passed. They were passed by this Honorable House. So, Madam Speaker, if we fast forward to today, we still operate under the prescription law. And Section 4 of the prescription law says, 4.1, when any beach has been used by the public or any class of the public for fishing, for purposes incident to fishing or for bathing or recreation, and any road, track, or pathway passing over any land adjoining or adjacent to such beach has been used by the public or any class of the public as a means of access to such beach without interruption for 20 years, the public shall, subject to the provisos hereinafter contained, have the absolute and indefeasible right to use such beach, land, road, track, or pathway, unless it appears that the same was enjoyed by some consent or agreement expressly made or given for that purpose by deed or writing. So, Madam Speaker, that the law makes it very clear and indefeasible and absolute. Those are very strong words, Madam Speaker. And in layman's terms, it means a right or title and property that cannot be made void, defeated, or canceled by any past event, error, or omission in the title. Madam Speaker, with such strong wording, it's a bit puzzling why we continue to have conflicts and disagreements. People continue to block access roads and pathways. Madam Speaker, people still call the police to stop the public from using these rights of way. Unfortunately, Madam Speaker, people think that when they purchase property, it extinguishes those rights, rights that are given to the public by this law. There are people who deliberately conceal these accessways, let them become overgrown with vegetation or whatever, so the public is no longer really aware of where they are. And Madam Speaker, as we continue to develop this country, this problem is only going to get worse. Some property owners in this country seem to think that they can do as they please because it's their property. And logically, that would make sense. You would expect that if it's your property. But they don't educate themselves on just what these rights mean. And there's no way that they're buying these properties and are unaware that these rights of way exist. They do not recognize, Madam Speaker, the serious overriding nature of these rights of way. So, Madam Speaker, the prescription law deals with how disputes are settled with regard to prescriptive rights. And Section 9 states, where the public or any class of the public have used any beach, land, road, track, or pathway in the manner specified in Section 4.1, which I read earlier, for the period mentioned in the said subsection, and such user is disputed, an application may be made to the Grand Court for settlement of the dispute by A, any person concerned in the dispute, or B, the statutory authority, department of government, or agency designated by Cabinet by order, charged with the responsibility for ensuring access to public beaches on behalf of the public or any class of the public. Unfortunately, Madam Speaker, what this does is that it fails to take into consideration that the individual who is going to take legal action in court is going to have to bear the costs, the legal costs associated with that action. And that action, Madam Speaker, is actually an action that is being taken on behalf of the public, so that the public can continue to have that right to access the beach. So what this motion is saying is that there needs to be a more accessible solution to settling disputes. And as per the Hansard's of private member, motion 9 of 96, Madam Speaker, the police used to see it as their responsibility. While it may not have been in statute, it was, I think, implied and assumed at one point that the police would deal with those sorts of violations. As things have evolved, as we've developed the country, private citizens are now taking up the battle, the legal battle. And as properties change hands, Madam Speaker, as the country continues to develop, especially where beach properties are concerned, we are undoubtedly going to see more disputes. Madam Speaker, we have seen some of these disputes turn violent. And we have seen that when the police is called, they do not feel that they now have the legal authority to intervene and to settle these disputes. Unfortunately, Madam Speaker, I don't believe it is right that private citizens must now be used to police our public rights of way. Government's responsibility is to ensure that these public rights are protected and that the law is enforced. But unfortunately, Madam Speaker, going to court, the courts are already dealing with large caseloads. I was at the Grand Court opening, and I heard the Chief Justice's report. And the courts are dealing with a very large caseload. And it should not be a lengthy process to have these rights enforced. The people of these islands, Madam Speaker, have demonstrated for well over 50 years now that we want these rights protected, and it should be an automatic mechanism to have them enforced and protected. Madam Speaker, this legislature has demonstrated its support on at least 2 occasions for the idea that these rights must be absolute and indefeasible and must be protected. So, Madam Speaker, we brought this motion because we're asking the government to take the necessary steps to remove the onus from the private citizen and put it in the hands of the authorities. There will be obviously a legislative process involved where if this motion is accepted and passed, that the government will go away and consider what changes are necessary to the legislation. And if the government is of a mind to do what this motion is asking, if there's a political will, then the government will have to come back with a bill later on and amend what we're asking for is the prescription law and the penal code. Or we could leave it here tonight as a private member's motion that passed, hopefully, and a moral victory. But, Madam Speaker, I think that it is high time now that we evolve the situation. Times have changed. Development has increased, as I said, and I think we now have a responsibility to advance the legislation concerning this. And I think it's time to ensure that we take the next step and not just have a private member's motion accepted, passed, and nothing else happens. Excuse me. Madam Speaker, rights received through the prescription law are legal rights, not equitable rights. Equitable rights, when disputed, it is normally the course of things that they would go to court for a decision, for a resolution. And equitable remedies are typically granted when legal remedies or monetary compensation cannot adequately resolve the wrongdoing that was done. And it's often a requirement, Madam Speaker, that legal damages be unavailable before a court will decide to issue equitable relief. But as I mentioned, this is a legal right, Madam Speaker, and legal remedies allow the non-breaching party to recover monetary damages. In this case, we're asking for that non-breaching party to be the Crown. These types of damages, Madam Speaker, are designed to compensate the plaintiff in a case for the harm that has been done. And what we're asking for is that that harm be considered a criminal offense, which would then attract a penalty, financial penalty, or even a custodial penalty. By making this a criminal offense, Madam Speaker, the law will now provide a legal remedy for the harm that is done. There will be no need for private individuals to do any more than pick up the phone and call the police. The courts will provide criminal sanctions for the offense, and if compensation is necessary as well. Madam Speaker, in reading and doing some research for this motion, came across a letter that was written to the Solicitor General from the Director of Planning on January 30th, 2003, titled Beach Access and the Prescriptive Law. And I'll read from that because it's a short letter. It says, please find under this memo proposals to have a number of historic accesses to the beach declared public under the prescription law, as shown on the maps provided and listed in the accompanying tables. The proposals are the result of a number of supporting affidavits signed by various members of the public attesting to the continuous use of these access points over the past 20 years. The department supports this move and would be most grateful if you could process these affidavits and supporting documentation through the courts at your earliest convenience. As you are aware, the increased population and tourist arrivals result in decreased areas for residents. Ensuring that all residents are allowed to access the beach and/or sea without too much difficulty will significantly contribute to our social development. If you have any questions or require any further information, please do not hesitate to contact the undersigned or myself. Respectfully yours, Haroon Pandui, Planning Assistant 1 for Director of Planning. Madam Speaker, the response sent back to Mr. Pandui at the time came from Solicitor General, Stephen Hall Jones, Senior Crown Counsel. And I think he spells out nicely what the legal position was. I won't read the whole response, Madam Speaker, but the parts that are important. It says, what I'm really getting at is that individual members of the public must launch individual lawsuits against the individual landowners for individual declarations by the court. Neither the Department of Planning nor Lands and Survey could be a plaintiff because the government department is not a member of the public or a class of public. The problem is that individual lawsuits are expensive, and individuals may not be willing to spend lots of money establishing a public right-of-way on behalf of the public generally. The answer is for him to form an association to raise money from the public to fund all the lawsuits needed, unless the ministry is willing to commit government revenue to funding the legal actions. It may be that some of the actions could be consolidated where the facts are identical, the disputes identical, the defense is identical, the claim under Section 4 identical, etc., unlikely to be the case in most actions. For the reasons explained, I have no instructions to seek Grand Court declarations in any case contained in your memo and attached documents. I'm afraid that individual persons who are in dispute will have to seek the appropriate order of the court. Madam Speaker, again, this supports our argument of the difficulty that exists now with the way the law works. And Mr. Stephen Hall Jones identified and recognized those difficulties and how difficult it is for private individuals to ask for these rights to be enforced. Madam Speaker, I don't want to push my luck, but I would go as far as to invite the government to amend this motion to say that these changes would come before the end of this session. I think that it is our responsibility to deal with this problem once and for all and to fix the problem now that we have the opportunity to do it. I've learned that nothing in life is guaranteed, and that when you have the opportunity to get things done, you get them done. Madam Speaker, I don't want to have to witness or to have to bring another similar motion to this legislature, this Honorable House, asking the government to act. It has been more than 25 years, Madam Speaker, and the attitudes, the opinions, the will of the people have not changed as far as this issue is concerned. And I think they have only become stronger. And I think this is our opportunity to get it done once and for all. I know that asking the government to give itself a timeline, a deadline, is not something that the government likes to see in motion, so I didn't put it in there. However, I'm asking the government to consider committing to a deadline. Madam Speaker, I don't want to have to listen to some future member of this honorable House reading from the Hansards of today's debates and using this debate, as I have done, to strengthen their argument to ask the government of the day to fix this problem. We have a golden opportunity now. I believe that the political will is here now. And it would be a good gift to our people for us to address this problem once and for all, because I can only see where it is going to get worse over time. And as these rights are challenged by people who simply choose to ignore the law, it is going to become more and more difficult for our people to enjoy those rights that were given to them long before any of us thought about politics. Madam Speaker, I want to thank the members of the Concerned Citizens Group. I know that my colleague from Savannah mentioned them as well, because they have taken on the fight to have prescriptive rights recognized and protected. But that fight has been a good example of how this process has failed us, because they have, at their own expense, mainly, taken up the battle. And it has almost put them in a position of contention with their own government, which I don't think any of us want. This contention between government and citizen over rights that are given to us, not just by statute, but by common law as well, has to go away. And we can fix it today. So with those few words, Madam Speaker, I wholeheartedly support what this motion is asking for, and I urge all my colleagues in this honorable House to do the same today, but to commit to doing even more in the very near future. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Member for Boddentown West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm going to be quite brief in my contribution. I just listened to my colleague from Newlands and earlier my colleague from Savannah, and I couldn't help but notice the history in which it took for us to get here. And Madam Speaker, I'm reminded that when people created government, they created government with three primary purposes: to protect their life, to protect their property, and to protect their liberty. And I think somewhere within our Bill of Rights, we already see that where those rights are actually enshrined in one way excuse me, or the other. One of the things that jump out, Madam Speaker, which I'm a little bit fearful of, having listened to some young people speak with regards to this issue, a lot of people are actually incensed. And it took me back to my time ago in school in New York, where one of the things that became quite popular during the 90s, for me at least, was the broken windows theory, where little small crimes, where people see little small things happening, it basically encouraged more crime. Not to say that the people who are advocating this would become criminals, but at some point, it's going to become a boiling point. In yesteryears gone by, the people who own this property, who came and brought this property, recognized that Caymanians had a right of way to the beach. And there's one thing that we do pride, it is our access to the beach. And I do recognize now that we do have some new players who give a little bit more trouble than others who don't seem to understand that. And my fear it is that these simple little things, these small little things, is what lead to some kind of social disarmament or social conflict that to some extent is unnecessary. I do really feel bad because at the same time, as I said earlier, that people also created government to protect their property. And somewhere in the back of the minds for these property owners, I'm sure they believe that there's a certain right that they have. I don't know what purpose, but they think. And we ourselves, at some point or the other, in this, as members of this House, have seen many conflicts with regards to land. I mean, one of my first government jobs was actually lands and survey, and I used to get the different stories of where people would move fence in the middle of the night and all that kind of stuff. This is something that we take very serious when it comes on to land in Cayman. And we're talking about a right that many Caymanians feel is not only legal, but also a God-given right to access the beach. And it is sad that, except for a few people, we are in this position, because I do pass some properties around the island where you can drive and you actually can see the beach access sign clearly visible, and you can literally see that path down to the beach there. So there are some people who are respectful of that tradition, but then there are those who are not. And I really feel bad because to go through the court sometime, it is becoming an expensive feature. And if there's one thing that our laws need to be, or justice to some extent needs to be, it has to be accessible regardless of what it is that you have in terms of financial resources or anything. It can't be a situation where you feel as if though, because of how much money you have, you can literally buy justice. There are some people who are arrogant enough to just believe that, you know what, we'll challenge the law, we'll tie up in court just for the sake of sometimes having a victory. And so it is a situation where we have to be very mindful. And the one thing that jumped out at me also, Madam Speaker, is that sometimes when I do speak to some people, they would say to me, boy, Chris, when I listen to you, sometimes you scare me. And I would say to them, no, ask me who scare me. Because there are some people that are coming behind that in the young people vernacular ain't taking no check. And we need to make sure we deal with this issue once and for all before it really becomes at a different point. So it is these little small things, Madam Speaker, whether we want to accept it or not. We look in our own country, going back to the same broken windows theory, where we allow small things to become big. We looked at as something as simple as a number business. It was always illegal from day one, but everyone accepted it as it is. And now it has almost become almost as if though part of, you know, who it is that we are and everything else. We see with the liquor license breaches to some extent with some establishments in terms of what it is that they're doing. You know, we see it within the labor law, we see it within immigration law, and so much so we have created a culture where people are beginning to accept certain things. Because, I mean, earlier we were talking about the mortgage issue. And I cannot fathom our bank would even get up and lend someone a 20, 25-year mortgage when they're on a work permit that can only go for 7 years. Are they that sure that that person is going to be staying much longer, that they could feel comfortable lending them money for 20 to 25 years? You know, when we know that there's a ceiling in terms of even them staying there. But it has become that relaxed attitude, that relaxed culture that we are promoting in this country. And we, as the political leaders of this country, need to be more mindful of the culture it is that we are creating. Because at the end of the day, the bigger we get, the more problems we will also have. So we need to start recognizing a lot of these things from early, start to try to nip it in the bud, and see if we can find some level of consensus. Like I said, I try to be balanced in terms of people or property. We all familiar with the incident, even in West Bay, one of our former colleagues inside here, that they're having over a property dispute and over the very same right of way too. You know, I even recently saw a YouTube video and everybody swear blinds that, you know, they're right in their position. But ultimately, what we do have when we pass laws is to find a balance where everyone feels excuse me, that they are represented and their interests are also protected. So with that said, Madam Speaker, I just wanted to rise to support this motion, but at the same time, ask the government if they do consider it, that whatever the penal code is, it has also got to be something fair and balanced too, and not anything over the draconian or anything, because it's still people's right we're looking at. At the same time, I do feel for some people where in the middle of the night, if you have people walking down the side of your house and that kind of stuff, because simply there's access, and from a safety concern too, people need to have some level of security and some level of comfort. No one wants to see anybody out their window at any time in the morning, just the excuse being I'm going to the beach. So I try to be as respectful or as accepting of everyone's position. But we need to recognize first and foremost that this is a traditional Caymanian right, and our preamble and our constitution speak to us respecting our traditional values and everything else, and we need to find a way in which to deal with it. And if this is one we have given many people access to justice that they can afford by having the resources of the government defend it, then I'm fully supportive of it. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? If not, does the mover wish to exercise his right of reply?
Madam Speaker.
Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll be very short because I think my colleagues have covered all the areas of concern in respect to this topic. I definitely will be voting for this bill, and I encourage this motion. Sorry, and I encourage all members to do so, particularly those who are in my era, by way of years in this honorable House, because it is assumed that some of us may still want to be around if the good people that we represent wants to keep us here. And some of the warnings that were given by the members who've given contributions so far, if those warnings are not heard and addressed today or within short order, we may be still in this House, if the good people put us back, having to face a very severe problem, possibility of unrest in our community, possibility of somebody getting hurt, and potentially even a suit on us, because we have a responsibility as legislators to protect the public's interests. I'm not going to repeat what my colleague said, but it is embarrassing when a former member of this institution that we call the Legislative Assembly has to go through this same thing that we're talking about, and there's still no resolve. I don't want to, if the good people of Georgetown decide to choose me as their leader again in this upcoming election or the other, I don't want to be here and know that we haven't resolved this problem. I think we all know that. And I'd say, particularly to the younger members on the government side, because I believe all members of the opposition will be supporting this motion, that I want you to think about that. I want you to think 8 years from now, if we're still here hoping to continue to lead the country in a good direction, to have that stigma and that history that you had the opportunity to do something about it and you didn't, could come back and bite you in the bum. So I just send that minor political warning, even if it can just boost us up a little bit to do the right thing, because this is a no-brainer, Madam Speaker. There's no questions about whether this motion should be passed. It's pretty simple. It's something that should have been done a long time ago. And I hope that we all do the right thing in respect to that and support the motion. And I congratulate the mover of the motion, Mr. Anthony Eden, the member from Savannah, for bringing the motion to this honorable House. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Honorable Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much. I just want to say a few words about this issue because I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what needs to be done. Madam Speaker, I think there is consensus as it relates to beach access and rights thereto and public rights of way. I think where the confusion seems to be is as it relates to process, Madam Speaker. The motion in its resolve says, be it resolved that the government consider amending the penal code and the prescription law to create a criminal offense for the act of obstructing a public right-of-way over any access to and use of any beach which may be prescribed as a public beach thereunder. But the discussion, Madam Speaker, seems to be a little bit wider than beach access. Seems speaking about public right of way and what needs to be done. And one member, I think, mentioned about causing some of these accesses to be overgrown and so. Madam Speaker, I listened to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, and he never, I don't know if he's not aware, but he never mentioned the Public Lands Law that was enacted here in 2017. Madam Speaker, that law, Section 26, I recall, makes it, expressly makes it an offense for anybody. It says, no person shall without lawful authority obstruct or interfere with any member of the public under this law to have access to public land or to exercise a public right of way over private land. And it creates a criminal offense. So there's already a criminal offense for obstructing these public right of way under Section 26 of the Public Lands Law. The law provides for the appointment of inspectors and gave them powers, Madam Speaker, to enforce the law. Inspectors have been appointed and have been working. So there's already an enforcement mechanism in the law as it relates to criminal offenses for obstruction of any of these public rights of way. And so, Madam Speaker, I am kind of struggling to see what else needs to be done. And I say that in good spirit. I'm not being critical. I think what has been happening, and I listened to the history outlined by the Honorable Deputy Leader of the Opposition, I think what has been happening is that some members of the public, whatever they might refer to themselves as, concerned citizens, are wrestling with how to go about dealing with this issue. And unfortunately, I think they have been getting conflicting advice about how to treat with the matter. The leader of the opposition, Deputy Leader of the Opposition, read a letter from Mr. Stephen Hall Jones, our opinion, which clearly at that time articulated the steps that needs to be taken in order to enforce these rights. Namely, where there's a dispute, then parties to that dispute must go to the Grand Court. And if you listen to how the discussion tracked, it seems to presupposes, Madam Speaker, that only one side would need to take enforcement action. But a lot of these right-of-ways, as they are called, are not registered, and so they are not legally recognized. And if they are not legally recognized, notwithstanding what the prescription law says, if there's a dispute about whether it exists or not, the only place you can have that resolved is in the Grand Court. So it is possible sometimes that persons, well, as is the case here, to claim that there's this right of way. We have been using this particular footpath for 20 years or more, and everybody knows that. And there's affidavit to that effect. But if the person over whose land that right of way exists is disputing that, then the matter has to go to the Grand Court for it to be recognized, for the dispute to be settled. The Grand Court ruled that yes, there's this prescriptive right, then it is recognized and registered as such. The whole concept is not self-executory. It doesn't work that way. So it doesn't exist because someone says that it exists. It needs to be, if there's a dispute, it needs to be adjudicated on and recognized as such, registered. And I think that is where the dispute or the issue lies with some of those who are trying to have them enforced, Madam Speaker. I think that is where the problem lies, and so. But I dare say that is in the past, because one of the main objectives of the public lands law was to address that very issue. And so the Public Lands Commission, Madam Speaker, has been designated under the prescription law when that was amended in 2017, the same time when the Public Lands Law was passed. The Cabinet has subsequently designated the Public Lands Commission to deal with the issue of public right-of-way. And the Public Lands Commission, as we speak, of which one of the members is one of the very lady named by the honorable member, Ms. Smith. She's a member of the commission. She sits on that commission. She has just recently been reappointed by Cabinet. The commission, I am advised, is in the process as we speak of putting in place the registration of recognition, or identification, and recognition of these public right-of-way. So there's a process in train as we speak, dealing with the issue. There are those rights-of-way that are recognized and registered, and there are those that are not registered, they're unregistered. The unregistered one has to be identified and registered in order for them to be recognized as such once there's a dispute about it. So, and in carrying out its function, Madam Speaker, if the inspectors who are dealing with these matters are obstructed, the Public Lands Law creates an offense for that. It even goes as far as creating ticketable or ticketing offenses for some of these matters. Sorry? Public Lands Law. So I think, Madam Speaker, what needs to happen is that the Public Lands Commission needs to be allowed to continue its work, Madam Speaker. Section 26 of the Public Lands Law 2020 revision. It says, Madam Speaker, no person shall without lawful authority obstruct or interfere with the right of a member of the public under this law to have access to public land to use public land or to exercise a public right-of-way over private land. A person who contravenes subsection 1 commits an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $5,000 or to imprisonment for a term of 6 months or to both, and shall, in addition to such fine or imprisonment, be liable to a fine of $500 per day for every day after conviction that such obstruction continues to persist. So the section already clearly creates an offense, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, yes. So, Madam Speaker, I think what really needs to happen, because I don't think anybody is disputing that members of the public have a right to enjoy these right-of-ways. And as the deputy leader of the opposition and the other members who spoke rightly identified, once these rights are recognized, they are indefeasible. They cannot be defeated. And I think there are ample evidence that can be collected to support the existence of these rights. But I think those who are involved in trying to have this work dealt with need to engage with the Public Lands Commission and allow them, Madam Speaker, to take the matter forward, because what now happens is that the expenses spoken to by honorable members on that side is no longer an issue, because the public authority that has been designated to now deal with that issue is the Public Lands Commission. That is their duty now, to deal with the issue. The members of the public don't need to take any actions in court to enforce these rights. All of that now devolves, Madam Speaker, to the Public Lands Commission, which is a public body that's charged with that responsibility. If I might just crave indulgence. So, Madam Speaker, Section 5 of the Public Lands Law states that its mandate is to protect the right of access to and use of public land, including enforcement of public rights of way. Section 8 of the law, Madam Speaker, also is of relevance, that the Commission may take legal measures to enforce public rights of way over private land. And then I mentioned about Section 26. So there's already a public body that is in existence that has been created by the Public Lands Law and has been designated by Cabinet with that mandate. So some members of the public are not obliged, Madam Speaker, are not required anymore, unlike prior to 2017, are not required anymore to take these matters up on themselves to go to court. There's no public body that is designated to do so, and is in fact engaged in the process as we speak. So I think hopefully that clarification would assist members. There's no need for any members of the public to be concerned about the expenses of enforcing these public rights of way. There's now a public body, the Public Lands Commission, that is now charged with that responsibility to do so. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, very briefly, whilst the Attorney General has explained quite well about the lands law, I think it is also incumbent upon me to point out that that process seems to be like molasses rolling uphill in dead winter. Because one of the things that was promised when we did that public lands law was that they would consult members of parliament in the individual districts. But the other thing we did was to make an amendment to it for the board to be one person from each constituency, as I recall. I know I appointed one from my constituency of East End, who has, and we suspect those people would have knowledge of their constituency. One of the things I'm noticing, though, is that the inspectors are not very knowledgeable of the areas that we have in this country. I recently noticed that there were 2 specific right-of-ways that were not earmarked with the beach access signs. And I engaged them, and I met them there, and I was told that I didn't know where the access was, because on the maps, they had the opposite map. We eventually agreed that there were 2 where I had pointed them out to be. But it's a slow process, really. One of the things I want to see done in this process, which as I recall, Mr. Miller and I tried getting it in under the lands law when that was done under the former minister, is under the planning, development and planning regs, any development being done in beach, resort, residential zones, and Madam Speaker, very briefly, where, let me read the provision. It is regulation, development and planning regulation 15(6), where planning permission is granted, and this is on the beach resort residential zones, where planning permission is granted for a development in a beach resort residential zone which has a frontage of 200 feet or more, the authority shall ensure that a public right-of-way to the sea is set aside and dedicated. Such a right-of-way shall be a minimum of 6 feet wide for every 200 feet of frontage or part thereof, and may be within an area set aside for setbacks. Now, the argument has always been that that does not enjoy the same position as a prescriptive right. However, there are those that are, the counter argument to that is that those that have been in place for 20 years, they would then fall under the prescription law. I believe all of those must be protected. The argument, as I remembered, was that because it was not established by virtue of use, which the prescription law makes provision for, then it could not be registered, thus leaving it and we know what happens with those. We relocate them. And we most recently relocated a number of them to join them up to get 18 feet on one side, whilst they had been there for more than 20 years. And I believe that that is an area that we need to make provisions that those are registered under the same registration as those by virtue of use, which can be considered indefeasible. Madam Speaker, what many people do not know or do not understand or seem to think that it is outside the scope of indefeasible rights is that below the high water mark is part of that public lands. Because these right-of-ways across people's land described as indefeasible rights, right-of-ways, join into the sea. That is the purpose of them. I said all of that to say, Madam Speaker, when I have had the occasion to witness members of the public accost people who use the beach for fishing activities. They're not understanding that they have no right to it. The other thing that needs to happen is we need to designate the high water mark or some boundary mark on the beach side in this country. I had occasion, a good friend of mine and the premiers who we were talking about earlier today, reminiscing about. He and I looking sprats, and he threw the net and shook them out on the beach, but below the high water mark, just above the surf. And we went along chasing them, the sprats, because they were moving. And when we looked, the owner of the house came out and started throwing the sprats back in the sea. Thank God for Arden McLean. Because I assure you, my friend wasn't very pleased and wanted to weight the person down with the net. And I certainly couldn't have that happen. Not in front of me, but more so to my good friend. Those are the things that happen that people who purchase these beachfront properties do not understand. I don't know if it's out of ignorance or out of being conservationists or whatever the case may be. They just are being careless with, or thinking that their ownership extends beyond where it really should, or where it really does. Culturally insensitive. That's maybe the case. I find that rather disturbing. Then we get to another place where some of these right-of-ways were made not for going to the beach, but coming from the beach, going inland, like around Queens Highway. Those were established in reverse. Because the mode of transportation was by boat. And the advent of Queens Highway then reversed them, because people were using Queens Highway, the motorized highway, and going down to the beach. And then we had them parallel along the bluff, because we were also walking along that bluff until the 80s. Until the 80s. So there's a lot of things to do here. I have made reports to planning on a number of encroachments. Well, I can't say encroachment, they're blocked with walls along the bluff. But of course, nobody uses that now, so nobody cares about it. But the fact is that they are established right-of-ways, indefeasible. And those are the things that needs to be looked at. And I hope that well, if there's a permission given. But, Madam Speaker, I know that the member from Savannah will do his wind-up, so I will not get into that with him. Thank you very much.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? The Honorable Minister of Education. Honorable Minister of Education, your mic is muted, I believe. Can you just unmute? We can't hear you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the hour is late, and the Honorable Attorney General elucidated quite clearly what the position is, but nonetheless, I'm reminded that our neighbors in Barbados suffered a similar fate. And a well-known calypso named Amita Gabby made a song. With your kind permission, I'd like to refer to it because this is the impetus of the government's political will when we did the Public Lands Commission. And the lyrics are as follows. They say, I grew up bathing in seawater, but nowadays that is bare horror. If I only venture from my seashore, police telling me I can't bathe there anymore, because Jack don't want me to bathe on my beach. Jack, tell them keep me out of reach. Jack, tell them I would never make the grade. They strengthen security and build barricade. That can't happen here in this country. I want Jack to know that the beach belongs to we. That can't happen here over my dead body. Tell Jack, Gabby say that the beach belongs to me. Look, that beach is mine. I can bathe there anytime. Despite what they say, I can bathe there anytime. And I believe that that had to be in the background of those who, in the previous government, continued by this government, put in place just before the last election, the Public Lands Commission. I'm happy to say that the Public Lands Commission has been established. There were amendments, as was mentioned by the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, where there is at least one representative from each of the electoral districts. We have been diligently working to put in place the draft regulations, and they're almost ready, but we have hired inspectors who go out inspecting. In fact, they have been putting up signage to indicate to the public where these right-of-ways are. Of course, there's always room for more, but correct procedure has to be followed. So, Madam Speaker, suffice to say that the merit of the motion is on all fours with the government's work and the work that has been done with the Public Lands Commission. And so there's two routes that the Honorable House could consider taking. Either the members, after hearing what the Attorney General has said and being reminded that there is a law, there's already a criminal offense by way of Section 26 of the Public Lands Law, further held up by Section 5 and Section 8 of the Public Lands Law, can either withdraw the motion, or if members are minded, because it does say consider, we could, as a House, can accept the motion and can consider and write back to say what the statutory provisions are in force and provide, a copy of the law. And once the draft regulations have been brought and passed, make those public available itself. But I would also like to go on the record and say that one of the known advocates, Ms. Esma Smith, and who works very closely with Ms. Cole from West Bay, I made it my business to put her as a member of the Public Lands Commission, because we didn't want a gap in repetition here in the Cayman Islands, knowing that she was very actively involved in the private citizens group. She is a very active and formidable member on the Public Lands Commission, and I have no fear that the representations of the Caymanian public as it relates to public right-of-ways are made very known there. And there have been times when she's felt that perhaps more needs to be done, that she's actually gone to the Grand Court as a private citizen to deal with it. So have no fear, there is representation there. So, Madam Speaker, I want to thank the members for bringing the motion, because I think it's important to keep it an active debate. But I wonder whether the members, after having heard what the Attorney General has said, backed up by myself, whether they would wish to withdraw the motion based on the fact that there is now in place a Public Lands Commission. They have been working, perhaps it's not as fast as some of us would like, because you have to go through the procedure of hiring staff. Staff is in place. We have active inspectors. If they have not, for whatever reason, been consulting with members of Parliament, I can certainly pass that on to the officer in charge in the ministry to make them fully cognizant that members are very interested, and as all 19 members of this Honourable House, and that they're a valuable resource and all have a vested interest in their constituency and would like to see these maintained. So, Madam Speaker, if the members, if the Honourable Mover and the seconder is not minded to withdraw the motion based on the fact that both the government and themselves fully believe and adhere that these right-of-ways must be first and foremost preserved and also maintained, and that is in fact happening. If not, then the motion could be put to a vote. But I can give the assurance of the government that we are very much on board with protecting these rights, and they've been working assiduously, given consideration of the various barriers. COVID-19 came, so it slowed down the actual full consideration of the draft, but the draft is complete. It's left for ministerial review, and that should happen within the next week or two. And they have the full support of the government, the Public Lands Commission, about going about preserving these rights, not just in one island, but all 3 islands. And they take this business very serious. I thank you, Madam Speaker, and all honourable members for having an interest in the preservation of these rights. And perhaps we can agree with the methodology by the way we deal now with this motion on the floor. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? If not, does the mover wish to exercise his right of reply?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First of all, I would like to thank all of those who have contributed. My colleagues on this side, the Honorable Attorney General, and just now the Honorable Minister of Lands. In light of what I have heard, I have decided to withdraw the motion, provided that in the government, which, knowing the Minister of Lands, I feel sure she will deal with this. What I don't understand is why, in light of knowing that all of these mechanisms are in place, that it seemed to be so much confusion, different stories coming from different sides. And I would urge the powers that be to do something about it. This has been around almost from time Jesus was on Revere Beach. And I am sick and tired of every time there's always some story or the other. But 99 out of the 100 people that you talk to want this resolved. Come on, folks. I leave it to my colleagues that have worked on this. Let's put together whatever it is. Try and talk, communicate. I beg on it to communicate. Madam Speaker, I make a motion to withdraw the motion.
Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will second that motion.
The question is that private member's motion number 8, 2019-2020 be withdrawn. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. Private member's motion number 8, 2019-2020 is duly withdrawn.
Private member's motion number 9 of 2019-2020, protection of marine environment, to be moved by the elected member for Savannah and seconded by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, the elected member for East End.
Member for Savannah.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to move private member's motion number 9 of 2019-2020, protection of the marine environment. Whereas the Marine Conservation Law 2013 revision was enacted in 1978 as the first step to protect the marine environment for the enjoyment of residents, tourists, and future generations. And whereas over the years, the people of the Cayman Islands have come to appreciate and accept the value of protecting the marine environment, and whereas it is recognized that the implementation of designated marine parks and catch limits in 1986 was necessary, and they have proven to be beneficial to the protection of the marine environment. And whereas in recent years there has been widespread evidence of poaching of marine life in parks and the marine environment in general, and whereas the Environmental Fund was established in 1997 for the purpose of protecting the environment, and whereas the Environmental Fund has accumulated millions of dollars over the ensuing years and continues to grow yearly by millions, be it therefore resolved that the government considers using monies from the Environmental Fund to purchase the necessary equipment to develop a marine enforcement unit within the Department of Environment, and be it further resolved that monies from the Environmental Fund are used to cover the yearly recurrent expenditure of such unit.
Is there a seconder?
Madam
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Madam Speaker, I beg to second motion, the motion on the floor, motion 9 of 2019-2020.
The motion has been moved and is open for debate. Does the member for Savannah wish to speak thereto?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just briefly, it has been brought to my attention, as most of you know, I'm not a sea person, that the plundering that is happening out in these marine parks and areas, someone drew to my attention that from Bodden Town up to Frank Sound and on up, that whole area is literally plundered. There's very little marine life left. There's very little conch, very little lobster, if any, if you can find it. And as have been indicated in the motion, that when these areas were protected and allowed to be left alone, that there was significant improvement and returning of marine life in these marine parks. Madam Speaker, it's not a lot more I can say, and it's not one person that has said this to me, but I would encourage that something be done to make sure that it's being monitored or policed or whatever, and I leave it to government to make their final decision. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Honorable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I arrived to give a short contribution to this motion, private member's motion number 9. Brought by the elected member from Savannah and seconded by the opposition leader. Madam Speaker, the Environmental Protection Fund was created on the 23rd of December, 1997 by government motion number 1497 for the purpose of defraying expenditure incurred in protecting and preserving the environment of the islands. It is required that disbursements from the fund may only be made in accordance with resolutions made by the Standing Finance Committee and under the authority of the Minister of Finance for the purpose of defraying expenditure incurred in protecting and preserving the environment of the islands. Madam Speaker, the mission of the Cayman Islands Government Department of Environment is to facilitate responsible management and sustainable use of the natural environment and the natural resources of the Cayman Islands through environmental protection and conservation, wise use, scientific research, and public education. Under Section 46 of the National Conservation Law, 2013, it states there continues to be established and managed as an environmental protection fund to be used for the acquisition and management of protected areas and for measures to protect and conserve protected species and their critical habitat. Section 47(1) requires the National Conservation Council to advise the Cabinet on the use of the fund and to be responsible for the management of monies dispersed from the fund, and Section 39A gives the Council the function of making recommendations on the use of the fund. Madam Speaker, in extraordinary Ordinary Gazette 50 of 2016, which was published on the 29th of June 2016. The National Conservation Council published its guidance note on the use of the Environmental Protection Fund. As per the Council's guidance note, eligible use of the fund include A, the Crown acquisition of land for protected areas, B, the creation of protected areas by conservation agreement, C, management of protected areas, D, conservation of wildlife, measures to protect and conserve protected species and their critical habitat, and E, legal support for the acquisition and management of protected areas or measures to protect and conserve protected species and their critical habitat. Madam Speaker, the measures proposed in the private member's motion number 9 of 2019-2020, purchasing of operational equipment, hiring of long-term employees, and funding recurrent departmental expenditure do not appear to be consistent with the eligible uses of the fund as described in the National Conservation Council's guidance note on the EPF fund. Madam Speaker, I mentioned this brief description of what the fund was designed to cover, and I do thank the member for Savannah for bringing this motion forward.
Does any other member wish to speak? Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Madam Speaker, thank you. Madam Speaker, I've been around here long enough. That is on this earth. To remember people that the Premier remembers. As a matter of fact, the Premier spent many a day in East End and knows the same people that I do. One in particular that comes to mind that he remembers very well is Stanford Dixon. As a matter of fact, the Premier used to pump gas at his father's gas station by Mr. Dixon's yard. I recall Mr. Dixon as a fisherman. He had other jobs, but his primary means of supplementing his income was fishing, and his passion. He would engage the fish before he went fishing. Engage out, you know, actually what you wanted. Premier can confirm that. He was such a good fisherman. When Mr. Vassell came to East End with that thing called the conservation law, which meant restricting that passion, that ability to catch what he wanted. And I only use him as one of the many, but because of his passion. Madam Speaker, I see Mr. Rankin really get upset with Mr. Vassell. as when Mr. Vassell served one term in this legislature as an elected member. Madam Speaker, the government nevertheless enacted the law, despite the opposition thereto. There were many people in East End and throughout this country who objected to it. Lo and behold, many lost their positions at the next general election as a result of enacting that law. Madam Speaker, years later, that same gentleman defended that law because he saw the necessity for it, he saw the validity in it, he understood that if he did not help preserve, then there would be nothing left for his grandchildren and their children and generations to come. I believe, Madam Speaker, Mr. Rankin's situation can be attributed to many in this country, in the District of East End, North Side, Bordentown, throughout this country, West Bay, Georgetown. They have tried desperately to protect it because they saw how fast the resources were dwindling. They also recognize the value it was to the overall economic stability of this country with tourism. When time moved on and they went at groupers to try and control them, and they recognized and they fought, we all fought against it because it was a traditional thing. We have now seen the result of that. It is increasing. I still believe that there should be a catch limit, which I propose. When we put the provisions in place for catch limits on counts and the size fish, never forget that, 2003, we sat in the committee room. I stood on this floor, the floor of this honorable house, and talked about criminalizing people like Mr. Rankin and others who were fishermen, and that the limits should be higher. We eventually got it to 10, 5 per boat, 10 per boat, or 5, whichever is less. If it's one person, you can only get 5. Madam Speaker, the protection of the environment in this country has come a long, long way. We then, in 2003, or shortly thereafter, put a license regime in place for anyone other than Caymanian. The member from George West Bay Central was here. He and I fought strong on some of these measures against them. But we both agreed that we should have a license regime in place for anyone other than Caymanians. That got destroyed at our courts because they said it was discriminatory against other people. Yet when I leave here and go elsewhere, I have to get a license to fish. Whether you go to America or Canada or whichever country you go to. I wonder if everybody understands how this country has now reacted to the removal of this license regime. Madam Speaker, I have laid all that out to say what I'm about to say. Madam Speaker, the National Conservation Law and Regulations makes provisions for license regime, but it's only Caymanian who has to get license. No one else. Do we realize that? Only Caymanians are controlled by this law. If you're Caymanian, you need to get a license for fish spot. You need to get, and only you can get the license for the fish spot. If you got seen, you need to get a license for it. The only thing that only Caymanians and residents needs to get license for is to spear lionfish. All other license is to control Caymanians. Yet, everybody else is destroying the marine environment. Unabated. No control. No enforcement. Yet, my good friend and member from Savannah is trying to arrest that, and the government response is that that's not what you use the money for. That's yours. You wait till I get to that. I don't care what time it is. It could be time to wake up based on what he responded with. Well, if that's what if that's what your choice is, you know what, you're not gonna prepare better. Okay. But I did that. Anyway, Madam Speaker, I thank the Premier for the intervention because I was going hard, you know. Okay. Trust me, because we take money to buy lands out of that environmental fund, and if that's the National Conservation Board, they want to control this money. We can't even find a seed dumpling on our Iron Shore. You can't find periwinkles. And we must sit down here and do nothing about it. no, that ain't going to happen. Whilst I don't have any grandchildren, I hope I do. I want to see them enjoy the same thing most of us did here. Madam Speaker, this is a serious matter that is happening. Even the loggerhead fries they're catching and mixing with rice. That's their staple. Now it's time to stop it. My research, there are a number of, but you know what's causing it too? And over for Mr. Miller, and he's not here tonight. Madam Speaker, the enforcement officers that we currently have, most of them got second jobs, so they ain't got no time to deal with the enforcement. Management of people's boats and management of their properties and the whatnot. We have nothing. We're not enforcing it. Madam Speaker, I want to believe the Premier that we got to do something about it, and the time is late, and I will back off, but I trust that something is going to be done, because the purpose of that fund must be to protect us, to protect our environment. If we don't find it there, I implore the government to do something, because not every one of us go along the beach as much as myself and maybe the member from West Bay. Not all of us. Every now and again, the Minister for Works will go, but that's every blue moon or every 20th blue moon. But I am on the beach all the time. The Premier don't get there that much. He drives up along it, and I go fishing often when I can. Haven't been for a while now, but we witness it. And it's destroying our marine environment. It is seriously doing it. I mean, when you can't even get sea urchins. Nothing. And after the Premier, I don't know why he did that for, lifted it that you could go fishing from the shore. And I'm sure he saw them. It was like I-95 up on High Rock Road. You saw it, Premier? And the number of them that were Caymanians were few. But I ain't got nothing against foreigners. I'm just saying they're not controlled, and we need to control them on how much and what they can take. And the things that we didn't take, that we didn't need, must be left intact. They are protected. Right in this law, they are protected. I mean, I don't know the scientific name for them, but the things like starfish, sea dumpling. Everybody asking. The long one and they're round like that, look like cucumber. Yeah. Sea cucumber, we call them. Urchins. Sea egg. You know what that is? Sand dollar. You can't even go in the sand anymore and push your feet and get scale pot. Premier, you and I grew up with this. We all did. The younger ones didn't have much chance. They were on computers and that kind of stuff. Fire coral. How much of us have not gone out there and got burnt with fire coral? I want my great-great-great-grandchildren to be able to do that too. I mean, bleeding teeth. How many people in this country know what bleeding teeth is? They're the same periwinkle, but they got teeth on the shell and it's red. And they're collecting them in bucketfuls. Buckets. Yeah, 5 gallons. Thank you. That's what we have had representation. And the member from Savannah mightn't say who most of his representation come from. P. Black. P. Black makes his living from fishing. And he is livid because he's there every day. That's Olsen Lever. These are the people that are concerned about it. Madam Speaker, I believe the Premier that he's going to accept this motion, but what the Minister was saying didn't give me much faith in it. But I believe him that he can do something about this, and I will not go any further. I will try to contain myself and not debate this any further, because I got plenty to say.
Does any other member wish to speak? Honorable Premier.
Madam Speaker, as briefly as I possibly can. Madam Speaker, what the Minister read to this Honorable House was the views that were given to him by the Ministry representing the views of the Department of Environment. The Minister asked the Honorable AG to have a look at it, and based on the advice we have, we now believe that there is scope. There is scope to utilize funds for at least some of the purposes that the motion seeks. And so as the motion asks the government to consider, we will consider the matter and respond to the mover and indeed to the House more broadly. There continue to be issues with the way the National Conservation Law is applied or not, as the case may be, and there continue to be these issues around the use of this fund. This fund, as the motion has pointed out, is a creature of this House, and the provisions the provisions which were put in the bill that passed, which took away the power of this House, which includes the Finance Committee, because the committee is a creature of the House, to administer that fund, have not been brought into force and will not be brought into force under this administration, because we believe that that power needs to continue to reside where it is now, in this House. So Madam Speaker, I give the member. You would, let me not bother to say that. So Madam Speaker, I give that assurance to the House that the government will consider the motion. First, we'll accept the motion and we'll consider what the motion seeks.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? If not, does the mover wish to exercise his right of reply?
Yes, ma'am. After getting slapped down on the last one, I feel better now. I just want to thank those that have spoken and my colleague from Bordentown, Minister for the Environment, etc., that they realize whether it's the environment under the sea or on top of the sea, I ain't gonna do down below that. I'll walk butt up, stop, but I'm not going down there to look for them counting lobster. You guys can have all that you want. And I want to thank the Honorable Premier for working with the Honorable Attorney General that to identify. I know that you had been told that you can't use this fund for certain things, but I fondly remember the last government when my dear friend, the honorable member from Northside, was seeking a few $1,000 to finish his primary school, that the then minister acceded to allow him to use that fund for that. The money they put by us came on and use it where we think it's best and stop listening to foolishness. Thank you all.
The question now is, be it therefore resolved that the government considers using monies from the Environmental Fund to purchase the necessary equipment to develop a marine enforcement unit within the Department of Environment. And be it further resolved that the government considers using monies from the Environmental Fund to cover the yearly recurrent expenditure of such unit. All those in favor, please say aye. Those against?
Aye.
No. The ayes have it. Private members' motion number 9, 2019-2020 is duly passed. I now call on the Honorable Premier to move the adjournment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, some members have asked me to indicate when I thought the House would next meet. I can indicate that we propose to meet the week of beginning the 27th, well, Sunday's the 26th, Monday the 27th of July. I haven't been able yet to fix a date, whether it's the 27th or the 29th, but the week of the 27th. Madam Speaker, with that, I want to thank members for their hard work over the course of the last few days, and I think we've managed to get through all of the business on the various business papers. So I thank members again for that, and with that, I move the adjournment of this House.
Madam Speaker?
Sine die.
Madam Speaker?
Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for your indulgence. I was just hoping that the Honorable Premier can indicate what he was intending to address in the next meeting of the House, because I think that there might be indications to deal with the domestic partnership bill, just for my role to make sure I consult with my people, which is quite difficult in this restrictions of the pandemic. I just want to know, because I have a lot of work to do, to speak to my people about that domestic partnership bill, if that is intended at the next date, which mentioned by the Honorable Premier.
Honorable Premier.
Madam Speaker, I've said that to the member yesterday. I said it to him today. I say to him for the third time publicly, the domestic partnerships bill will be part of the government's agenda at that meeting, but it won't be the only matter that we address.
Madam Speaker, if that's the case,
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
thank you. The domestic partnership bill came out this week, tomorrow, a week ago, and there was a 30-day consultation. And you're telling me you're going to, someone is going to formulate all that response within a few days and compile that and put it back in the law, in the bill. And Madam Speaker, importantly, how are we going to consult with our people? Not even public meetings you can have now, because there is no public gathering. And the easiest way to do this is public meetings. The Premier knows that. And you can't, you're somewhat restricted from going house to house because of the social distancing. I mean, it's going to be an uphill battle for this consultation to be properly done by virtue of meetings.
Okay. The question is that this House will now adjourn sine die. This Honourable House stands adjourned until sine die.
You got vote on it?
Oh, sorry. The question is that this House... The question is that this House will now adjourn until 10 a.m., until
Better pay attention.
sine die. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. This Honourable House stands sine die.